17 years old. He lied about his age to join the army, sneaked onto the ship, made an unauthorized landing at Iwo Jima, and that morning, in a trench, he saw 2 grenades. He had 1 second to decide. February 1945, Iwo Jima Island, Pacific Ocean. The island was small, a dot on the map, but thousands of men would die for that dot. The Japanese had been fortifying it for months. Underground tunnels, hidden positions, trenches carved into the rock. The surface was deceptive. The beach looked almost peaceful, but every step carried the risk of death. On February 19, 1945, the United States Marines landed. Casualties were heavy from the first hours. The island was resisting far harder than anyone had expected. Jack Lucas had no business being on that landing. He was 17 years old, from North Carolina. He'd lost his father young. His mother had remarried. Home felt restless. School felt pointless. And there was a war, far away, but there. At 14, he enlisted, lying about his age to get in. Then he got on a ship, without orders. The ship heading to Iwo Jima. The day before the landing, he went to his commanding officer. He was straight with him. "I'm here. I want to fight." The commander couldn't send him back. He handed him a weapon. Lucas went ashore.
The Iwo Jima landing began on February 19, 1945, and continued until March 26. The island was strategically vital. It would serve as an emergency landing strip for B-29 bombers and as a forward base for air operations against the Japanese mainland. The Japanese had fortified it with an 11-mile tunnel network. Approximately 30,000 American troops came ashore on the first day alone. Casualties were severe from the opening hours. Lucas's age and unauthorized presence were formally documented after the fact. He was among the youngest Marines on the island that day.
A few days after the landing, Lucas was moving through a narrow trench near a tunnel network. 3 men beside him. There was no jungle here, only rock, ash-gray soil, and fire coming from every direction. The Japanese resistance was stronger than anyone had prepared for. Every tunnel was a threat, every boulder a potential ambush. The men moved one at a time, careful, slow, holding their breath. Lucas was out front, moving through the trench. He heard a sound. Strange, metallic, dry. He looked down. At the bottom of the trench, 2 grenades, pins pulled, seconds from detonating. 3 men were behind him, no room to run. The trench was narrow, walled with rock. No one could get clear in time. What did Lucas feel in that moment? Years later, he said this: "I didn't think. The brain didn't engage. The body just moved."
Standard American grenades of that period had a delay of approximately 4 to 5 seconds after the pin was pulled. In a confined trench, that was not enough time to escape the blast radius. Falling on a grenade to absorb the shrapnel with one's own body is documented in military records as an extremely rare act. Medically speaking, surviving a detonation at that range is highly unlikely. Lucas's case has been examined in military medical literature specifically because of how improbable his survival was.
2 grenades. Lucas saw both of them. Lying side by side, pins pulled, the trench was narrow. The 3 men behind him had no idea yet. 1 second, maybe less. Lucas bent down. He pulled 1 grenade under his body. He tried to get the second one too, but the soil was soft, and it shifted. He couldn't get it fully beneath him. Only his hand was over it, and he went down, face first, eyes closed, teeth clenched. His friends still hadn't understood what was happening. Then the blasts came, one, then the other, back to back. The trench filled with smoke, rocks scattered in every direction. For a moment, nothing was visible at all. When the smoke cleared, Lucas was on the ground, not moving. His friends leaned over him, looked. He was breathing, slow and heavy, but breathing. Nobody knows what went through Lucas's mind in that moment. But afterward, he said one thing: "I thought I was dead, and I was at peace with that. In that moment, I was at peace." But he wasn't dead.
The record shows that one of the 2 grenades detonated directly beneath Lucas's body, while the second only partially came under him. Paradoxically, his failure to fully absorb the second grenade may have contributed to his survival. Rather than concentrating in a single area, the shrapnel dispersed across a wider surface, Medical assessments identified more than 250 shrapnel fragments in Lucas's body. A significant number of them remained there for the rest of his life.
When Lucas opened his eyes, he was looking at the sky. He couldn't feel the pain yet. There was only shock. His ears were ringing. No sound, just that ringing. And a feeling, heavy and pressing, as if his entire body was being crushed from every direction at once. He tried to move. His right hand didn't respond. His left leg didn't respond. But his eyes were open, and he was breathing. His friends were around him. One of them was saying something, mouth moving, but Lucas couldn't hear a word. He could only see. He saw their faces. He saw they were alive. That brought him something, a strange kind of relief given everything. Medical evacuation began. Lucas was carried out. He felt what was left of his uniform being cut away. Hands moved across his body. Then the pain came. Real pain, delayed, but it came. Lucas always struggled to describe that pain. In later years, he said this: "Everything was burning, but I thought burning means alive." Hours later, he was on a hospital ship, in surgery. Surgeons working to remove shrapnel from his body. They couldn't get it all. Some fragments were too deep, others were too dangerous to touch. More than 250 pieces. Some of them would stay inside him for the rest of his life.
Survival rates in shrapnel injuries are directly tied to the depth of the wounds and their proximity to vital organs. In Lucas's case, the fragments largely avoided critical structures, which is medically unusual given the circumstances. During surgery, the doctors determined that removing certain pieces would carry greater risk than leaving them in place. Lucas underwent multiple additional surgeries in the years that followed. Some of the shrapnel shifted over time, causing new complications decades after the war had ended.
Days passed on the hospital ship. Lucas lay still. He couldn't move. His body was full of shrapnel. Hands, legs, shoulders, chest, everywhere. The surgeons had done what they could, but the work wasn't finished. More operations needed. More time needed. He was 17 years old. Sometimes he looked at the other men in the ward, wounded everywhere. Some silent, some groaning. Lucas tried not to make any sound himself. He didn't fully know why. Maybe habit, maybe pride, maybe just exhaustion. Nobody knows what his mother felt when the news reached her, but a letter came. Lucas said years later that reading that letter was the first time he cried, quietly, without letting anyone see. Because up until that moment, he hadn't been afraid. Not in the trench, not in the blast, not in the operating room. But when he saw his mother's handwriting, something came loose inside him. The war wasn't over yet, but the front was over for Lucas. He was evacuated. Treatment continued. It took months. His body was slowly pulling itself back together. But some things weren't coming back together. Sleep wouldn't come at night. When his eyes closed, the trench was there. That metallic sound was there. And that moment, that single second, played again and again. Lucas didn't tell anyone. There was no language for it yet.
Lucas's injuries fell into the category of severe traumatic wounding by any clinical measure. The long-term physical complications of shrapnel injuries are well documented, but so are the psychological effects. During the Second World War, those psychological effects were not systematically treated. The post-war adjustment of young soldiers like Lucas was largely overlooked. Physical recovery was monitored. The mental weight was left, for the most part, for the individual to carry alone.
The war ended. Lucas came home. He had left at 17. He came back at 17. But the person who came back was not the boy who had left. The Medal of Honor ceremony came. He was the youngest recipient. The papers wrote about him. Photographs were taken. America wanted a hero story, and Lucas looked exactly like one. Young, brave, alive against all odds. Lucas stood at the ceremony, took the medal, smiled, but nobody asked what was happening inside him. The years that followed weren't easy. Marriage, divorce, work, walking away, the military again. Lucas re-enlisted years later. He wanted to go to Korea. He wasn't allowed. Then back to civilian life. He built a business. It failed. He built another. The shrapnel in his body kept moving. New surgeries were needed. His relationship with doctors never ended. Across decades, When he reached his 80s, in one interview, he said this: "I never regretted what I did in that trench. But if I'd known the rest of my life was going to be this hard, I'd still do the same thing. Nothing would change. That clear, that tired."
Jack Lucas received the Medal of Honor on February 14, 1945, becoming the youngest Marine ever to receive it up to that point. His post-war life was marked by difficulty on both personal and financial fronts. Historians point to Lucas's story as a representative example of post-war trauma and the struggle young soldiers faced returning to civilian life. Beyond the moment of valor, what men like him lived through for decades afterward remained largely invisible. The physical wounds were tracked. The psychological weight was not.
Jack Lucas died in 2008. He was 80 years old. There was still shrapnel in his body. There was until the very end. Some of it was never removed. Removing it was more dangerous than leaving it there. He carried it inside him for decades, every day, with every movement. Maybe that was a kind of metaphor. The things the war left inside him, he carried those the same way, couldn't remove them. Removing them was more dangerous than leaving them there. What happened in that trench lasted a few seconds, just a few seconds. But those few seconds shaped 80 years of a life, shaped the surgeries, shaped the nights, shaped every time he looked in a mirror. Lucas didn't talk about it much. When people asked, he gave short answers. In one interview, he said this: "People call me a hero. I was just there. And in that moment, there was no other choice. There was no other choice." That sentence is worth sitting with, because it says something that hero stories usually leave out. Big decisions don't usually come from big thoughts. They come in 1 second, in a narrow trench, in front of 2 grenades, and in that second, who you are shows itself. Lucas was 17 in that trench. He couldn't vote yet. He couldn't legally drink yet. He'd had to lie about his age just to get into the army. But that morning, in that 1 second, he saved 3 lives, and then he lived 63 more years, with the shrapnel, with the nights, with the hard years. The heroism ended in that trench. The life didn't.
Lucas's story sits at the intersection of 2 things that war history doesn't always hold together: the moment of action and everything that comes after it. The Medal of Honor records the second in the trench. It doesn't record the decades that followed. Historians who have studied the post-war lives of Medal of Honor recipients note that the gap between public recognition and private reality is often vast. Lucas lived inside that gap for 63 years. What he did on Iwo Jima took less time than it takes to read this sentence. What it cost him took a lifetime.